Hey Grace Church, my name is Josh. Welcome to the weekly for the week of April 9th. Today we are talking about the resurrection of Jesus. So for the last year, we've been walking through the Gospel of Mark, and this past Sunday, that journey came to an end. And throughout this entire series, I've been using a particular movie to talk about what Mark is doing in his Gospel, and that movie is The Lion King. And here's why. In Mark's Gospel, he's proclaiming something to us, that Jesus is the rightful King of the world. And he's proved that through showing power over the supernatural world, the natural world, the physical world, that he has power over everything and he's the rightful King. And so I banged on the table and said, Pride Rock belongs to Simba. It's his. His father gave it to him. It's rightfully his. And so that's been our connection through this journey. Well, in the last chapter of the Gospel of Mark, this claim that Jesus is king is being put to the test because the last chapter told us Jesus was wrongfully tried, he was falsely accused, he was denied, he's ultimately crucified by the Romans, and he's put in the tomb. And then in Mark 16, something happens that nobody saw coming. And so in Mark 16, it says this: When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You were looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they've laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter, he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. So in these 7 verses, you have the single greatest event in human history. No event has had greater impact on the world. This event changed our calendar. It shapes our culture. And these few words, the one who was crucified, he is risen. He's not here. These are beautiful words, the 3 most beautiful words in history. He is risen. And so we said this Sunday that Easter is not the victory. Good Friday was the victory. Easter is the vindication. Easter is the remove all doubt, remove all suspicion. Jesus really is who he says he is. He really took our sin. He really paid our penalty. He really absorbed God's wrath. He really achieved our salvation. He really is justified as the one true King who is infinitely worthy of our obedience and our allegiance. And he is good, and even death itself obeys him. So in the crescendo of Mark's gospel, Mark makes the claim, God has the power over death. God is launching a new world in Christ, and you are invited to belong to that world. So that's the claim. But at the end of Mark 16, this person that tells the women who come to the empty tomb, go get the disciples and Peter. Why is this and Peter there? And so that's where we spent the rest of our time on. So in Mark 16, it says and Peter, because a few verses before it tells us that Peter has just denied Christ. And the truth is, Peter probably thought his life of following Jesus was over. He felt like he had failed too much, he had done too much wrong, and now he is going to go back fishing. And in John, the Gospel of John, it tells us what happens in the rest of the story. So Mark says, go tell the disciples and Peter to meet us in Galilee. And then in John, it tells us what happens there. And so in John 21, it says that Jesus appears to his disciples, but they're not meeting him on the mountain like they're supposed to. Rather, they went back fishing. So for Peter, it's like a career move. He's like, I don't follow Jesus anymore. I've done too much wrong. So I'm just going to go back fishing like this to my old career. And Jesus shows up to him on the shore, and he asks them, they're fishing all night long, and he asks them, do you guys have anything? You haven't caught anything, have you? And the disciples say no. And then Jesus, and by the way, they don't know this is Jesus. He says, cast your net on the right side of the boat. So they do that, and then they have this miraculous catch of fish. And ultimately, one of the disciples tells Peter, hey, that's Jesus. Peter jumps in the water, swims to Jesus, and has this interaction with them. And here's what we learn. That even though Peter had failed, and I don't know what you think about when you think how God would respond to you in failure. But even though Peter had failed, Jesus comes to him and he meets him he reenacts the miracle, because this miraculous catch of fish is the same thing that happens in Luke chapter 5, where this is the first way that Jesus actually called Peter to be one of his disciples, is through a miraculous catch of fish. So Jesus is playful with Peter. He reminds him of this first moment of their connection. He tells Peter, hey, this relationship is still available. And then he has breakfast cooking on the fire. And so what do you think God does after you fail? Let this picture be the picture. That if you failed at 3 a.m., how does God treat you at 9 a.m.? Well, according to this story, Jesus resurrects from the dead and cooks Peter breakfast. That's what God is like. He invites you to eat with him. He invites you to sit with him. And often we stop the story right there. You know, you have this, okay, God is so gracious, God is so faithful. He reenacts the miracle. He cooks breakfast for Peter. You know, they're having fish tacos. It's going well. And you kind of stop right there. But here's the tension point. You can always expect grace from Jesus, but you can never expect Jesus to pretend like our sin didn't happen. You have to deal with it. Jesus is going to bring up Peter's failure in order to heal him, because he knows that if he doesn't do this every single time the rooster crows, Peter's going to remember his denial. So Peter is going to be restored by this conversation with Jesus. So Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? Peter says, yes. Do you love me? Yes. Do you love me? Yes. And every time Peter says yes, Jesus tells him, well, then feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. And so here's what we learned, that the shaming power of failure, because when you fail, it has shame connected to it. The shaming power of failure can only be overcome by loving Jesus. Loving Christ, the resurrected Lord, is how you overcome the shame of failure. And so in this moment, Jesus is not just reinstating Peter in their relationship. He's reinstating Peter's identity. He's reinstating Peter's connection. He's reinstating Peter's calling. And he's commissioning. There's a recommissioning here, saying, feed my sheep. You're not done. I still have something for you. And so the challenge for us, and I know it was a little cheesy, but I went back to The Lion King. And I said, in The Lion King, the reason that Simba is not at Pride Rock is because Simba believes that his failure caused the death of his father. And so Simba runs off and he hides. He meets some other friends and, Hakuna Matata and the whole thing. And ultimately, Simba forgets who he is. He forgets his calling. He forgets his role in the world. And someone has to remind him of who he is. And so I think that's true for many of us. Many of us, when it comes to following God, we're like, man, I used to know God, but I don't really do that anymore. I'm not a bad person. I have my Hakuna Matata, no worries life. And yeah, I pay God homage every now and then. But in the reinstatement of Peter, you have this call to all of us that says, do you remember who you are? Because Jesus is coming to you and He's reminding you of your first love that you had. He's inviting you back into the relationship. He's inviting you back into your identity and your calling. And He's asking all of us, not just do you love me, which is the most important question in the world, do you love me? But then secondly, are you feeding my sheep? Are you obeying me? Are you sacrificing? Are you doing the work of bringing my kingdom to this world? Because loving Jesus is not enough. He's also invited us to take part in the mission of getting His glory to the ends of the earth. And so a resurrected Lord has paid for everything for us. And then He comes to us and says, love me with all you have. And then in loving me, let that overflow into feeding my sheep and joining me in the mission. And that's the beauty of the resurrection, is that it invites us into the new world that Christ offers and invites us into the mission of getting that glory, His glory, to the ends of the earth. So my prayer is that we are those kind of people, Grace Church.